Okay, so this is the Starcraft versus Warhammer comparison video. A lot of stuff I'm going to be talking about for Starcraft feats and powers as a verse, I think, are generally unknown by the nerd public at large. So I'm pretty excited to get into that. Damien, do you want to kind of describe like how it is we actually have decided to structure this?
Yeah, so we'll start off with what we believe to be the weakest soldiers on both sides, and then we'll kind of compare them in a squad, how they would handle a fight against each other, given a scenario. We'll just kind of go on like that until the tier list is done.
Yeah. Um, I had thought of something that was like important to say, but I completely forgot. Oh, I remember what it was. So, feats for both verses. If you're really familiar with 40k, if you're really familiar with StarCraft, you know that the feats for both verses can get really muddled and inconsistent. So what we're doing here is comparing baseline. So one of the rules that we've said is like we're not scaling based on named character feats, and we're also going with like the default loadouts for what you would typically associate or like deploy these units with. So I'll be talking about like when I talk about the Marine, it's going to be like a default Marine loadout, what you would expect from when you deploy a Marine to the battlefield, what they are capable of and what they would bring to the fight. And named characters are prohibited specifically because we are planning on maybe doing a named character list comparison for both verses.
And on the 40k side of things, there is so many special weapons that a squad of anything could be loaded up with. That's just going to be too much and would actually just drastically change the base tier list. So I'm just going with las guns and bolt guns, unless otherwise noted.
All right, so you're kicking us off here with the only F tier entry.
Yep.
What are these guys named again? The portrait for them is a little funky. I apologize for that. Well, I'll try to make sure the portraits are a little bit better for the next one.
It's the Planetary Defense Force. You could think of them as a modern day military in terms of gear and equipment. Some good old 5.56 assault rifles, some nice little Kevlar body armor, and they get eaten alive by bugs.
Yeah, I was the first time you brought this up, I was surprised to hear about these guys existing because I didn't really think about like modern weapons being used in like the 40k setting. That being said, yeah, these guys don't belong, I think, anywhere near the other tiers.
No.
So we're putting them in the only F spot we have.
There is some Planetary Defense Forces that would have like las guns and bolt guns, depending on like how rich the planet or the system is. But average is modern day.
Yeah.
So
So to my constant joy, beating them is the medic from StarCraft. um, the medics in StarCraft. And this is an important note. Depending on how familiar you are with StarCraft lore, during the like Great War, which was like the Brood War, medics did carry weapons, but I'm going to be talking about the most up-to-date version of StarCraft units. So we're talking about like post Defenders of Man arc. So this is after the Brood War, after Aemon, or after the events of Nova's Special Ops. So like the most modern version of StarCraft that there is. So medics don't carry guns anymore. They just have their CMC armor and combat shield. The funny thing about that is, though, the CMC armor is 100% impervious to what would be like the equivalent of modern day assault rifles and small arms weapons. So in this case, a medic using the powered armor would be able to just kind of go up to one of these guys and punch and kill them.
yeah, no amount of teamwork or tactics. I mean, unless you drop an entire building, but
Yeah,
the scope of this fight.
Yeah, in the scope of this fight, we're talking about like the general, like in an average fight, who comes out on top most times, and we'll be comparing like in 1v1 scenarios as well as like some squad settings. But I think generally, if it's a 1v1 or if it's a squad of medics versus a squad of Planetary Defense Force, without any kinds of weapons at all. The CMC power armor, it just sort of speaks to its effectiveness versus like what would be modern day weapons.
Going up next would be the Cadian shock troops, or just your average guardsmen. This is where a medic would get blasted, I feel, with the las gun. It's not known for penetrating, but it's definitely known for blasting chunks of material off. In a squad of about 10 of them, hosing down a medic, it would kind of melt their armor away, melt them too.
I have no issue with seeing the guardsmen taking the fight. It's just that this is like an iffy sort of tier because the medic is as far away from the Planetary Defense Force as maybe the medic is from the Space Marine. Yeah. So, who's your first addition to the C tier? I think is where we start to get into like some actual sort of more even ground fights and can talk about.
Well, you would put somebody up to fight the guard.
Oh, that's right, yeah. So, fighting the Guardsmen, I would have the Wranglers. Wranglers are an interesting thing in StarCraft. They're psychic. Terrans in StarCraft are technically all psychic, similar to Warhammer. And for the purposes of this video, we've decided that the psionics in StarCraft and the psionics in Warhammer are going to essentially be one for one and function identically, and that'll come into play as we get into the upper tiers as well. But Wranglers are the low grade, but actually have powers psychics that there are. So what happens in StarCraft is if you're a kid and they like round you up, these children, they round them up and they like do these tests for what is called your psionic index score. If you register as like a 3 or above, they continue testing and like they take you from your home to like start training you to see if you can become a ghost. Now, if your PI is not at least a 5 or what's called a teep, then they turn you into a Wrangler, which means you have some ghost training, you have some combat efficiency and things like that. But they're not like assigning you on ghost missions at all. Wranglers typically don't even have like the armor, like the Neil Steel weave that Ghosts wear, nor the CMC armor. Like they're not frontline fighters. They're specifically hunting down other potential ghosts in the Dominion territory itself. So as far as their effectiveness versus the guards, what's been shown by Wranglers is that they can sort of control small groups of Zerglings, or at least influence them. They can create like psychic barriers to block out fire from weapons. They're still, psychic human beings. They're just not good enough to be ghosts. So in conjunction with their powers and their training, I'd say they put up a pretty good fight versus the Guardsmen, being that at the Ghost Academy, they're trained to do things like dodge hypersonic fire and react to those kinds of attacks and generally just get like pretty good training overall. If I'm being honest, we don't have enough showings for them to like make a hugely consistent case. Like apparently they exist en masse, but the most Wranglers we know about are named, and the showings that they have is like varies a lot in terms of what they can do. So in the most general terms, they need to at least be good enough to hunt down and detect and like kind of put up a fight with rogue ghosts and be able to capture psychic children, which can actually be very dangerous in certain circumstances.
Guardsman's... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, for those at home, what are the grading scales in terms of psychic capabilities for both sides, just to kind of set a ground line at this point? That's
a good question. I know Warhammer's is, I think, a bit like larger, the scales between them. Do you want to talk about that first, Amy, or should I?
You go first.
Okay. So the PI index in StarCraft, the Psionic Index, it's PI for Psionic Index, is a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 to 2 is your average human, like technically sitting where we are, we'd be considered 1 to 2, which is like minimum psionic activity, aka not psionically powered at all. 3 to 5 is where you're like useful. 3 to 4 is like you're useful enough to be a Wrangler. 5 is really like where things start to get interesting. So 5 are what's considered Teeps, which is TEEP. They're good enough to be ghosts. So ghosts are bare minimum a psionic level 5. So above that, in the higher echelons of 7 to 8, you have your teaks, and then 7 to 9 you have your teaks, and then at PI 10, this one's a bit harder to quantify, and again, when we get into the higher tiers, I can talk more about PI 10, but it's not really a rating, which is to say PI 10s are unique cases, each one of them. So it's not like you could compare 2 PI 10 ghosts and get like a really hard set defined of what they could do. That the exception being that like they're still much more powerful than a PI 9. So that's sort of how that works on the Terran scale.
Over on the 40k scale, the scale goes negative first, meaning you're a blank. It works up from there, going to like having a level of psychic resistance, then your baseline of just no connection or no psychic talent. Then you kind of work up from there, from having what they would call good luck or like a sixth sense, where you have just a little bit of psychic potential. Then you work up to having an unaware psychic potential, and then you kind of go up from there of actually having like more powers and being able to control it. Higher still, just crazy nonsense like Malkador, Magnus, the Emperor, some other.
I think I saw
Knights.
something along the lines of like a 24-point scale, ranging from nothing to basically being the setting's god.
Yeah, it gets the scale that I will basically be using for this video is you're either a blank or you're a full-on psyker with cool powers. I won't be really talking about anything in between, nor the Emperor.
Yeah, and on that note of blanks, like I said, we're considering psychic powers in StarCraft are actually similar to the ones in 40k, but we're considering like if you're a blank in 40k, you'd be able to affect ghosts the same way blanks would be able to affect psykers, and vice versa, because there is something similar to what would be the pariah gene in 40k in StarCraft, but I could get into that when we get into more the ghost tiers. So with that established, Wranglers are basically like you would say your standard Guardsman, but they do have psionic powers, such as being able to create barriers, and a PI 4 Wrangler especially would still be able to do things like psionically enhance their strength, reflexes, things like that, making them superhuman. And that's one thing I want to note here is like Wranglers are still very easily, if they're like talented psionically, superhuman level. So that's where this is coming from, is like they have all this like standard armaments that you would give to someone in like the respect to the StarCraft setting, but specialized training.
I would say in a 1v1 fight, your Wrangler would win. In like a squad versus one of them, 3 out of 10 times I could see him winning the Guardsman.
I think that's a pretty fair comparison. I don't think it's impossible for the Guardsmen to win here, since the Wranglers, again, don't have like the armor. They're pretty much limited to small arms fire or like the civilian grade Gauss rifle attacks. I'd say that generally the Wranglers would take the fight, but that's really just because they have the advantage psionically. So who do you have for the Wranglers to be relative?
I would with the Catachan jungle fighters. These guys know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. Their world's like a death planet, so every one of them that survives living on their world is just really strong, has great innate senses. Their strength is comparable to that of unarmored space marines, being able to carry and fire bolters, which is not something a normal human can do. If you fire it, you're breaking bones. That's why like Guardsmen would often carry them around on like tripods and set them up like mounted guns that way. So I would say in hand-to-hand combat and in a shooting match, I could see a Catachan jungle fighter winning with difficulty.
Yeah, I'd say in this one, I'd definitely call them relative, with the Catachans taking the fight maybe 6 out of 10 times. Again, they're not ghosts, and I don't want to start to specify feats that I've only seen ghosts be capable of, but being able to do things like project psychic barriers to block incoming fire, and like psionically influence Zerg is not nothing. So they're definitely still talented, but they're not the soldiers in war that we see typically. So I'd put these two as relative, with giving the Catachans a general advantage.
Oh, one other one that I wanted to throw in here was the Adeptus Arbites. I would put them under the so many names.
The Catachan?
No, under your guy.
Oh, the Wrangler.
Yeah, the Wrangler. I don't think the Arbites would be D tier necessarily. I still think they're C tier because they're better equipped and have good training. Though I just don't think that they have enough combat prowess to take on a Wrangler. They're more of like peacekeepers on worlds, literally being Judge Dredd in both appearance and function. So they're not necessarily trained to fight the strongest that the galaxy has to offer. They're mainly meant to keep down like cults and criminals and stuff like that.
And just for the sake of being able to follow the conversation, I'll be arranging the tiers like this, where the closer you are to the actual letter here, the higher up you are on the list.
Yeah.
Would the Guardsman be on the left then?
I think so. Yeah. Okay, following the Catachans, we have the... This is where we start to get into some like actual StarCraft infantry. We've got the Firebat. The Firebat does have modern CMC armor, same as the Medic. Only this time they actually have weapons. Not only that, but theirs is an especially like more heavily armored version than the Starcraft Marines would be. However, Firebats are nearly exclusively pyromaniacs and resocialized criminals and things like that. If you are at least passingly familiar with StarCraft, then you've heard about like the fact that most of StarCraft's infantry are conscripts and like criminals and things like that, which could like it definitely plays a part in things here. But towards the end of StarCraft, the modern era we're talking about, it is still about half of them that are criminals and like resocialized and things like that. But in general, they're still better trained. Like these aren't just like, you don't just pull guys off the street and make them into Marines, and it's not like every criminal becomes a Marine in StarCraft. They have to have a certain amount of like strength and like fighting potential to even be considered. That being said, they're not like overly special, and for that reason, the Firebat is like sort of the least special. They're insane. Their suits leak toxic chemicals into their breathing apparatus. And really the main reason they're down here is because their weapons are, although like really effective, very short range. We can talk about them in a squad versus whatever, you know, we're going to put up here from the Warhammer side.
Well, them going up against the jungle fighters, the jungle fighters would have las guns and bolt guns as like a mixture. They could take on some Firebats, though I don't see them necessarily winning, just because they don't have a whole lot of protection. Their training is good, but they are more lone operatives, a la Rambo, like they're fucking totally not stolen TM. I don't know. They're just not going to take on a flamethrower very well.
And another thing worth mentioning is that the Firebat is the first of the StarCraft tiers to have access to Stimpacks, which is a massive thing. So when it comes to Stimpacks, what I would generally consider is just take that unit's placement and bump them up a tier, since we're doing like the pluses from here on. It's sort of like a half tier bump. So in this case, if you were to take a Firebat at C plus and include the Stim, that would put them at a solid B. Stimpacks in StarCraft, for those who aren't familiar, are universally available. What they do is they increase aggression, morale, and speed and reflexes. So they put the user into a sort of bullet time for a limited amount of time, which is why I'm not putting the units necessarily where they would be with Stimpacks active, is because it is like an equipment that's temporary. But if you wanted to take that into consideration for one of these fights, you'd say like, well, this unit with Stimpacks would be, such and such power. Being superhumanly fast and more concentrated, which is the effects of the Stimpack, I think is like, it's a really significant edge. And in StarCraft alone, if you're familiar with the games even, you can tell like the effectiveness of being able to fire like twice as fast and move twice as fast is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, so Catachans, they take a 2, maybe 3 out of 10 fights. So.
Yeah, I would say, in my opinion, the Catachan, a lot of these fights in the early stages boil down to how far away are they?
Or,
because
I would
range,
say
the Catachan would win, normally.
I'd say the Jungle Fighters would win if they can get the drop on them.
Yeah,
I would say the
that's
same
their
thing.
entire point.
Mm-hmm.
But, like Bears had said, if they have a Stimpack, you can close distance quickly.
Yes.
And that can really turn a fight.
Primarily what Firebats use the Stimpack for is like when they... It's almost never like, I need to be able to cover more area with my attack. It's like, I need to get to that target instantly. And they do that. Not instantly, I don't want to be hyperbolic. Because when we get to like the prototypes and stuff, we'll get there. But the Firebats, definitely, yeah, with the Stimpack, that's what they're used for. Is like, cover that ground, get in close, and get into your weapon's effective range.
Yeah, so in this specific case, I think that is what really edges the Firebats over the Jungle Fighters for this specific matchup.
Up next for me would be the Sisters of Battle.
Sisters Battle, one of my favorites of all the infantry.
Yeah. Nuns with guns. The Sisters of Battle are known for burning things, burning the heretic. They are often equipped with flamers and meltas, as well as bolt guns, because they are a powered armor unit. So they're significantly more resilient than your standard guardsmen. They would easily, in a squad, take out a Firebat, or anyone in armor, really, with just a melta shot, because it pierces through armor and then melts whatever is inside of the armor. Bolt guns also can shred, I believe, Space Marine armor from StarCraft.
Yeah, I think in like, sequential fire, like the bolt gun's gonna tear it apart. The armor, similar to like what happens in StarCraft, like the Marine armor can tank a shot or two from the Gauss rifle itself without the Marine inside instantly dying. But when you get into like the way someone actually shoots, it's not 1 or 2 bullets. It's gonna chew it up, and the person inside's gonna die.
And then another thing in the favor of the Sisters of Battle is they have this X factor of such unbelievable faith in the Emperor that they more often than not, just get lucky on the battlefield. Their shot lands precisely. They survive, the whatever just misses a vital organ or whatever. They are just, on average, lucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, faith is an interesting mechanic in 40k that does not come into play in StarCraft for the Terrans. I think I agree with you saying like the Sisters of Battle with their range, their own power suits. Maybe that's something we should touch on. Is that this is like the first of the 40k tiers that have access to those, as well as their training. I honestly could see the Sisters of Battle taking the fight similarly to like how the Catachans would need to get the drop on the Firebats. I'd say the Firebats would need to get the drop on the Sisters in order to take that fight. Maybe 3 out of 10 times.
I do also want to kind of bring up, like we had talked about it a little bit, how we were all kind of surprised how fast anybody in power armor is.
Yep.
Like, even just an average sister can move unbelievably quickly. So I don't know how that would compare to Firebats, if that would even be similar. Because if the sisters are just faster, then how would the Firebats even be able to get the drop on them if they can just run away?
That's a good point. I will take a moment to sort of clear the air about, I think, another common misconception regarding StarCraft's power armor is that it's like this bulky, unwieldy thing. If you actually like get into the lore of StarCraft, it's a lot more of a natural extension of like the body of the people who are proficient in using it, and that's an important distinction. Is that rookies in the power armor are going to make it seem bulky, unwieldy, same as like their weapons. The Gauss rifles, they're not going to be able to control the spread. That being said, people who are extremely proficient with these armors and these weapons, they have no problem moving in them at all, and the armor does elevate them to a level of superhuman strength and peak human physical speed, because Marines aren't necessarily slow. Like, they won't outpace a Zergling, but they're able to run and keep up with some of the like land roving vehicles. Not like a Vulture of StarCraft, but things like the Hellions and the siege tanks. That being said,
That's
I think.
I was just gonna chime in saying that Sisters of Battle are just about there as well in their power armor. They're unmodified humans, but their power armor makes them superhuman strength, superhuman speed, and their training makes them have insanely good reflexes.
Yeah, I'd say the Sisters' training is like the training and the range of the weapons is, I'd say, the most definitive thing that like gives them that huge edge over the Firebats here. CMC armor is very useful, but Terran weapons are configured specifically to fight Zerg. And we'll talk about that a little bit, maybe when I get into the Marine and we start talking about the Gauss rifle a bit more. But yeah, I can definitely say that the Sisters like comfortably would take this. I think what would make them relative is the Fireback do have the Stimpacks, which can help them a little. I think with those active, they'd be able to fight on more even ground, but it's not their default. So
one final thing I want to just mention in the Sisters' favor going forward is that they have an extremely high pain tolerance. They actually enjoy pain. They're all masochists. Because they feel it brings them closer to the Emperor. So oftentimes when you like look up art for them, they're disfigured from prior injuries.
The next two I have to talk about could really be either in this same tier, like they're relative to each other, either in the same tier or like one tier separating. I'll submit the just to get him on here, John Marine. So the default StarCraft Marine, outside of their suits, they're actually still forces to be reckoned with. I was, before the recording of the video, showing a scan from a panel of the comic where we see a Marine physically punch a guy like clear into the air, and it throws him across the room. That may seem like strange considering that like we're staying away from named character feats and things like that, but ultimately StarCraft Marines are pretty consistent in terms of being peak physical human strength. That's not to say like their combat prowess is at the same level as like the level of training that other levels of StarCraft and 40k receive, but in terms of just like baseline statistics, they're kind of monsters. And with the CMC armor and the Gauss rifle, which is like what gives them a massive edge, I'd be comfortable putting them up in B as well. In fact, I think I may do that, and I'll include in the description for this video the calculator we used to determine the effectiveness of the CMC Gauss rifle versus like the Ceramite armor of the Space Marines. What we found was that the CMC has twice as much penetrating power as the bolter. And that's just in terms of penetrating power. What's important to know is that the Gauss rifle fires 8mm iron or steel spikes at hypersonic velocity, which is the most important thing here. So they have an effective range of between 2 and 2.5 kilometers. They're effective anti-air, so Marines actually do shoot down low-orbiting ships and things like that. The weapons are designed to punch through as much armor as possible. And the CMC armor it's layered with Neil steel, which is itself really durable when it comes to plating, but the Marines armor has, like, I would say, like, the bare minimum of what it needs to take a couple of shots or survive, like, a little bit of a Zergling attacking them without them instantly dying. Overall, though, the suit is designed to be a stable platform for the gun. It's supposed to keep the Marines safe in all environments. They can fight on anywhere from, like, the magma-covered char to the depths of space. It does keep them safe from, like, the Zerg creep and, like, infestation. You know, a Marine fighting against an infestor isn't going to get infected just by being in proximity. So their suits are actually really effective at, like, keeping them safe from everything that's not another, like, a bullet or a gun. The gun, however, is pretty effective at killing anything it's pointed at. I'd say, like, with that tremendous, like, range and being, I'd say, peak human inside the suit and then the suit elevating them just outright to superhuman levels, I'd give the fight to them over the Sisters of Battle, especially when we consider things like the Stimpack and that, like, potential 2-kilometer range.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's, like, a closer fight than any of the difference in tiers so far. The Sisters aren't in Ceramite power armor, and then we're also not talking about, like, any specialized unit of Sisters. So I would say 3 or 4 times out of 10 they'll lose to a Space Marine. Very much depending on distance. And in close quarters, the Sisters do have access to power swords, which are very good at cutting through things, though their strength isn't on par with the Space Marine, especially sticked up. So it's a close fight, but yeah, the Space Marine would take.
I think that range is the most definitive, like, element in, like, who would take the fight. Marines don't do incredible in melee at all. That's what the Firebat is specifically designed for, is to work with Marine squads and give them that cover in melee versus, like, oncoming Zerg and, like, Zealots and things like that. So at your average distance, I think they're pretty effective against each other. In a higher distance fight, I would put the Marines here, but and if you take their Stimpack into account, you know, it would bump them up. But, like, yeah, I think you're right when you say, like, it's pretty relative. Like, I'd say probably they're almost the most relative of the tiers here.
So to go up against the Space Marine on my side, I would go Tempestus Scions. These are elite Cadian shock troops. They're not Cadian. They're from the Schola Progenium.
Is this
which is... No. It's the first ones on the tier list.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. These guys I would move up to B tier. They have the most specialized training. And they have some really good gear, actually. They are equipped with what's called the Hot Shot Lasgun. As its name would imply, it's overcharged and is very good at penetrating armor. They can often kill Space Marines with it. Not like a squad of Space Marines, like a single Space Marine and a squad of them versus them. They can deploy from low orbit with their grav parachutes, which kind of just slow their descent. It acts as almost an anti-gravity field around them. And they can use it to make empowered leaps to gain advantage shots over people. I don't remember if they're genetically modified. I don't think so.
the way it was originally described is like they're like the peak of what a normal human could accomplish within like the setting, right?
Yeah. And they're also equipped with black carapace armor, same as sisters. So they're on par with defense, but their offensive weaponry and their training is far superior.
Yeah. I'd say I'm comfortable putting them into this next tier as well because I think these four, the next one I'm gonna talk about being the fourth, not the Firebat. Firebat bringing up like the tail end of this whole like relative scheme here, but I think the four that including the Reapers who I'm gonna bring in probably are like the closest in terms of like a group scaling until we get to the more ghost level stuff. I'd say the Tempestus Scion's training and like the equipment that they bring really distinguishes them here versus your average Marine. I could easily see them taking the fight. They're the perfect shock troop. They're effective, but against like a specialized type of unit, they fail most of the time. And I think in a squad setting or in a 1 versus 1, like the 1 versus 1 could be closer because the Marine has a lot of the equipment bringing up the pulling a lot of the slack for them. But I think a coordinated strike of Tempestus Scions, who are these like special ops soldiers, versus the Marines, who are generally I guess what I'm just trying to say here is I could see it being like in favor of the Tempestus Scion like easily 7 out of the 10 times probably. That being said, up against the Tempestus Scions, I would have the Dominion Reaper. So Reapers are the same as Marines with incredibly intensive training and specialized equipment. They're the same person that you would make a Marine, except they're neurologically resistant to resocialization, which means that the Dominion can't actually, like, they can attempt to mind control them and it won't work. So one thing to point out is that in StarCraft, having access to your own memories and distinct personality is a big factor. Again, we'll get into it when we talk about the ghosts, but is a big factor in like how well you perform on the battlefield. And in general, Marines can be like effective in combat, but they're like robots. Like they can literally be programmed to take orders and just die on command. The Reapers are the antithesis of that. They can't be resocialized. Therefore, even though they're these incredibly dangerous criminals, we can't make them into Marines. So to get the most use out of them, the Dominion trains them in a different fashion and gives them these specialized equipment, which is the jump jets and the scythe pistols. So Reapers specialize in like hit and run tactics. They can sort of sustain low flight. If you're just familiar with the games, you know they can go up and down cliffs and things like that, but they can actually fly just for small periods of time. The Reaper training is extremely intense and they frequently die. A lot of the research I did for this video included reading short stories as well as comics and basically like using the Wayback Machine and a bunch of other methods of getting as much StarCraft lore as I possibly could. Big thank you to Blizzard for deleting half of the lore that exists. Reapers, only 10 to 15% of them even make it through training, and when they're training for like jump jets and stuff, like it's normal to have concussions, but also people will die because they don't. What happens is the adjutant, which is like this AI, will control their jetpacks and determine like to get them used to like steering. They have no control of the jetpack. An AI has control of the jetpack, and it will veer them off course. It will do like all kinds of things to intentionally put them in danger and put them in harm's way in order to get them used to maneuvering their bodies with the use of these jump jets. And so like 10 to 15% of people making it through this training are like the upper echelons of when you take these resocialized criminals and put them in this armor. Like this is as good as they can get, basically.
And for those in the back who may not know, would you mind explaining resocialization, since this is kind of like the first introduction, I guess?
Sure, yeah. So resocialization is the Dominion just scoops up a criminal that's like dangerous. Like typically it's like the worst criminals will get conscripted to become Marines if they're like, you know, seen to have some kind of able-bodied and, you know, be worth putting on the front lines. So the process of resocialization involves deleting real memories, replacing them with fake memories, and some mixture of the two. Well, they'll keep certain things intact, but like fabricate like new environments or different characters for the Marine to end up essentially forgetting who they are and becoming a more like stable and perfect soldier. One short story about a Marine, or that included a Marine who went through the process of resocialization, was like this serial killer. It was a woman who was a serial killer, but after being resocialized, she was like basically this model soldier who wouldn't deny like a superior's any command. And so resocialization is actually extremely effective when it works. The fact that it doesn't work on these Reapers does go some way into explaining like their, I would almost call it like pure survival instinct. And like one of the things the Dominions actually recruit Reapers for is specifically their unpredictability, and like that's what it requires to become a Reaper. Who would you say takes the fight? The Reapers.
It would come down to gear, I would almost feel like, because their training's on par. Tempestus Scions are trained from birth, essentially, in the Schola Progenium. They go through rigorous training there. People who fail the Schola are killed. They come out with like unwavering loyalty. They will always follow orders, even if it's to kill the person next to them, essentially. That's actually commissar training. Is if there's a commissar who shows a little bit too much free will, they're assigned to go kill the person they've been training with their whole life, essentially. And if they don't, then they're next up on the list of people that get killed. So that's just the kind of absurd training that they go through in the Schola. Their training is really good. Their gear, in terms of overall 40k, it's middling at best. Sure, it can pierce through Space Marine armor after a couple shots, but it's not gonna like one-tap Tyranids or basically anything higher on the list.
Mm-hmm.
They're highly effective special forces. Honestly, it would just come down to how effective is your guys' armor and weaponry.
Honestly, not very effective at all. But that's because the Reapers are trained to be highly maneuverable and fast. So it's technically the same sort of construction as the CMC armor that the Marines wear, but it's designed to be lighter, and they can take less direct shots, but the point is to not be hit. And Reapers actually do a really good job at that. There's it's a named character feat, so I'm not gonna bring it up. But there's Reapers are generally pretty fast and very, like, with the jump jets, highly maneuverable. So I think honestly their defensive capabilities are, like you said, middling. The offensive capabilities though, so the P45 scythe pistols are specifically designed to take down like a lighter class of armor, and lighter in this case being like the CMC level armor, as opposed to like Ultralisk and Roachling type Zerg level armor. So Starcraft has these things called needle guns that punch through armor specifically, and they're effective for like targets that when they're hit by bullets they die. But if you take a needle gun and shoot an Ultralisk, it's like, sure, you punch through its armor, it doesn't care.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what the that's similar to what the Reapers wield, is like these guns that, like, it's designed to kill smaller targets that are gonna die from like bleeding or could die from like impact wounds, as opposed to larger targets. So I'd say that their offensive capabilities here help them in that fight.
Okay.
I feel like if it's going to be this close, then maybe the Reapers take it, but otherwise I feel like this is more of a 50-50.
Yeah.
I thought that this was like probably one of the closest. Like I said, these four here I think are the closest of what we've got here. I could see
I would be fine leaving this as a 50-50 because it really does feel that way, and then us both selecting new guys.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, at that point it really doesn't matter what you're comparing. It'll be effectively the same thing either way for the next tier.
And to B+, I'm putting Marauders. Marauders they're described as walking tanks several times within like StarCraft guides and lore. It's essentially how much armor can we put on a person without actually putting them inside of a vehicle. And then they have the Punisher grenades, these grenades that shatter on impact, blowing apart armor. They're extremely effective. Besides that, they have specialized suits that create ammo for them on the battlefield so that they don't need to worry about like reloading and things like that. They're just definitely the single most effective Terran infantry unit at doing what they do.
I don't know if I want to put this next unit up in B+, but the Kasrkins, or Karskins, however you want to say it. It's the ones you were trying to grab instead of the Tempestus Scions.
Okay, sure. Would you put them at the top of B then?
Yeah, for sure. They are the Cadians' take on Tempestus Scions, essentially. They follow the old French Grenadier mindset of Grenadiers back then needed to be huge, beefy people because the grenades that they were throwing were very big and heavy. And that's all the Kasrkins are, or not that's not all they are, but they all are huge humans, 6 foot and above, I believe. Very muscular. They're chosen on battlefield accolades alone. So, like, you can't be chosen because, you know, your daddy was one. You have to have insane combat prowess. And then they're equipped in all the same gear as the Tempestus Scions, as well as, like, additional plasma weapons. They're also known to fight in melee with orcs and win. So their strength feats are pretty absurd. So they're very good. I just wouldn't say that they're a cut above Tempestus Scions. They're just a little bit better than Tempestus Scions. Karskins, I don't see them actually winning. Yeah, Marauders just seem to be able to have more firepower than what a Karskin could actually put out. As well as Marauders having thicker armor, better armor, even though Karskins have equipment made to punch through armor. It just seems like it would take 1 or 2 shots at best, while they can get shot once or twice themselves and die.
Yeah, I definitely say the Marauder is the first tier that, like, if you did wield a C-14 against them, the Gauss rifle, you would actually have to go through maybe a full clip before the Marauder, like, was down. It would still take a fair amount of time to, like, tear through all that armor and rip them apart.
I'll talk about my next guy, and then we'll see if we put them on a tier above, because this is when it starts to get a little absurd in terms of 40k power level.
Yeah, I'm glad we're reaching this level.
I'll bring up Sister of Silence now.
Sister of Silence now? Okay.
Yep.
I can comfortably put them above the Marauder.
Yeah. So they aren't modified like Space Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And their gear is comparable, which is why I want to put them in A tier. I'll probably also put Space Marines in A tier, but Sister of Silence, being a blink, like I mentioned earlier, they have an absence of the warp. Wherever they are, the warp is not. So, on this equalized psychic shenanigans, what that means in a battle is being around them is uncomfortable at best, and, like, will throw you off, make you nervous. Even if, like, you have above and beyond training, it's like actually affecting your soul and its presence in the warp in terms of 40k. And so no matter what your training is, you just don't feel right next to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives them an edge in just about any battle, where if you take a second to second guess yourself, they're already bringing their sword down on you. And they wield force weapons, which is like psychically imbued weapons, which have the ability just to negate resistances. Mm-hmm. It's obviously more effective against demons, and that's primarily who they fight. But it does slice through armor like butter.
Yeah, I'll say the one minor caveat about the when I was saying like the 1-for-1 with psionics versus the warp is the non-psychic people for StarCraft, being that in StarCraft there is this thing called a psi screen, which is a little piece of technology that costs the GDP of a planet to produce. It makes whoever is wearing it completely immune to psychic effects, and also people who are psionically powerful, it affects them in the same way that the blank gene affects powerful psykers, where they like sort of collapse and like can start screaming depending on the intensity of it. However, psi screens have no effect on people who are not psionically powerful. So even though Terrans are technically all 1 or 2 on the psionic scale, a psi screen doesn't hurt a Terran who's standing next to it that isn't psionic. And I'd say that's the one caveat with the like blank gene versus the regular Terrans. I'd say it's definitely effective for like ghosts and stuff like that. So that's the one thing I want to talk about there. And I'll talk a little bit more about psi screens as we actually get into ghosts. That being said, I think the Sisters of Battle, or not the Sisters of Battle, Sisters of Silence, with their weapons and training, I could see them taking the fight versus Marauders 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah. I don't really have anything that goes in B+ tier, because everything beyond this is just like genetically modified super freaks.
Yeah, that's fine. That's totally okay. They're sort of two different classes as we approach like the difference here. There's like almost a hard line that works out pretty well. I wouldn't. I'm trying to think. So, Mercenaries are weirdly extremely like powerful in StarCraft relative to the normal units and infantry that exist. A mercenary in StarCraft is a soldier who generally has their memories, is not resocialized, can still be an extremely dangerous criminal, but they have the best gear and years of combat experience on the field. So, whereas a conscript might get, whatever, let's call it 20 days of training to become a Marine, a mercenary Marine, by the same token, familiar extensively with their equipment, from the suit to their weapons. They're specialized, spec ops. The creation of the War Pigs, one of the original mercenary groups of the Dominion, they were specifically designed to be spec ops soldiers. So there's a battle that the War Pigs fought where they went to kill, before he became the emperor of the Dominion, while they were working for the Confederacy, and they fought Zerglings without armor. And that is just kind of a really insane feat. They were shooting the Gauss Rifle has 2 modes, one where you're in the suit and one where you're not. It has 2 triggers. They were using the version of the fire of the depleted uranium rounds, where they are firing the civilian trigger outside of their suits, but they still effectively gunned down a group of Zerglings that had the drop on them, which, for comparison, when a group of Zerglings got the drop on a squad of Marines, they killed about, I think it was a dozen of them before the Marines had even reacted. So the fact that the War Pigs outside of their suits did that, it speaks to the level of what this kind of soldier is. They actually talk a decent amount about the process of who you have to be to become a War Pig, and by extension a sort of this classification of mercenaries in StarCraft in general. There's a specific kind of soldier with a specific amount of experience and training that they're not standard. There's a reason why there's billions of soldiers in StarCraft, and only these people are actually paid to do their job.
But they still have just the same equipment, though. It's not specialized.
It would be they definitely have the combat shields, They would have the multiple variations of the C-14, such as like the grenade launcher attachment, the depleted uranium rounds. Their CMC armors would likely be Mark 400s instead of 300s. It's just top of the line equipment, but like it'd all function the same. It's basically like a Marine with all the toys that they come to play with. They're also generally more intelligent. In the War Pigs comics, like they know how to like retrofit dropships and hack computers and things like that. One of them like gives a rundown on like they come across some Zerg biomass, and just like by looking at it and scanning it, they start to like formulate conclusions. So like they're more intelligent than your average Marine as well. There's a fight where, I mean, I don't want to just talk about feats forever, so I'll just leave it at what I've said so far. They're top of the line soldiers is basically what I'm getting at.
I could definitely see, without Sisters of Battle being able to use their blank on normal people, like the Canon 40k, I could definitely see them losing, because it does grant them like forms of obfuscation where like they're hard to see. I'd given that story of the one person that was like totally invisible dying to a stray blow. Not all Sisters of Silence are like that, but some of them are. And like I said, being able to just cause people to hesitate even for a moment is a big benefit, especially in catching like the lower level psykers. So without that I could definitely see them losing this. Not easily, but still like 3 out of 10 times. Winning 3 out of 10 times. Yeah.
I could see the Sisters taking the fight. I think I want to say that they're actually a bit. Well, do the Sisters use ranged weapons?
Bolt pistols. They're mainly melee. For Demon 6.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that front, and saying that the War Pigs and the Mercenaries would take the Sisters of Silence more frequently. I think the main sort of comparison feat that like speaks to their effectiveness is an average group of Marines. Zerglings get the drop on them. 12 of them die before they have time to shoot back. War Pigs, Zerglings get the drop on them. They take out the entire squad of Zerglings without any injury. And it's worth noting that they decided to turn off like the full auto on their guns. Like they decided to go with more controlled burst fires, like because they're that accurate, precise, and they didn't use Stimpacks either.
Yeah, Sisters are gonna get contentious if we talk about ghosts and like higher psychic, because like Sisters would easily have an easier edge, but generally, so I don't know, they're kind of hard to place. I'm happy placing them here. Just know that if we were to talk about them versus a psyker or equivalent of a psyker, they would most likely.
I've got another one that goes in this tier. They could go up to A+, but that's just the Aegis Guard. I'm not going to talk about a lot about them. The Aegis Guard are the Emperor's personal protectors. So it's this version of like soldier, but with not just like the best equipment, but like even like experimental and like the best training that they can get, and like being extremely loyal soldiers, not just criminals. They're like career soldiers and stuff like that. So I'd put them, I'd say that just gives them like ekes out an advantage overall. But I'm not really comfortable putting them up another tier, because I'd say that this tier is also where we sort of get a more less like strict tiering structure. Like these guys are closer than they'll be to the guys in the A+ tier. And on that note, who would you say could take these guys?
Definitely Space Marine. This is poster boy level, absurd lore all over the place. Space Marines, in terms of a battle against StarCraft Space Marines, the C-14 can penetrate their armor. Like we said earlier, the C-14 penetrates twice as much as a bolter, at least twice as much. If we get into like different rounds, it changes things. Anyway, the problem with shooting a Space Marine with a spike, though, is a Space Marine can easily shrug it off. Space Marines have shrugged off losing limbs and continued battling without like the slightest drawback. So they're walking tanks. They run at speeds of like 60, 70 miles per hour. They weigh like 2,000 pounds in armor. So they're tackling anything with the force of a car. Their guns are bolters, so nice exploding grenades that can shred armor pretty effectively with sustained fire. Yeah, they're the poster boys. They kind of get bland after a while.
Yeah, I'd say like you said, even though the weapons are effective against like the armor that they wear of the C-14, I would say the differences between the training as well, and especially Sand's Stimpack, the like reflexes and combat prowess of the Space Marine, like this, I would say that this tiering difference is pretty accurate, even though the weapon itself is pretty effective against like what they're going up against. It's all about who's using that equipment, which is what this tier list is really all about. Up against the Space Marine, and I would say going into the tier above them is the Ghost.
I'm here.
And this is gonna be a bit strange because the Sister of Silence, who counters the Ghost, is down here in A, but well, I'll just make comment to say that the Sister of Silence, depending on the range, would be effective at countering the Ghost. In a similar vein, the Ghost, I feel like, is pretty effective at countering the Space Marine. So I'm gonna be talking for a while now, since we're getting into StarCraft's like first genuinely scary like kind of thing. The average Ghost is a child who is taken from their home when they're detected to be of a PI 5 or higher. That makes them true psionically capable, so they have the ability to do things like cloak at the very minimum, as well as like EMPs and things like that. Ghost Academy training is reacting to hypersonic live rounds, reacting to like robots that are made to replicate exact perfect Zerg attacks, so supersonic hydralisk barbs. There's below Teep, so below 5, he's a PI 4.5 who's in Ghost Academy. Again, all I'm talking about right now is the Academy training they go through, who's able to punch through and decimate these machines with his punches, which are definitely psionically empowered. But like he gets in, that character specifically gets into the Ghost Academy because his parent puts him into the academy. He's not actually psionically gifted enough to become a ghost, and he's still casually like destroying these, at the very least, made of steel robots with his punches and his kicks. And they're combat robots that are made to train ghosts. Every one of the ghosts in the actual Academy series has some sort of special ability, such as being pyrokinetic, being able to create fire, someone hacking machines with psionic abilities. But I just want to point, like, the baseline I'm trying to create is like every ghost is special in their own way. That's before we get into their equipment and training, which allows them to cloak. Their weapons have an effective range of at least 5 kilometers. They used to get like ocular implants to allow them to see further than the normal human being, until they like started coming up with like methods of training where that became obsolete. They're trained for a lifetime. They're assassins primarily. That's like their primary job is be completely undetected, get in, get out, kill their target. One unnamed ghost who was sent to kill a guy, he's taken by surprise and electrocuted by industrial cable and electricity, like fully electrocuted, and shrugs it off. They're superhuman. I should say that, like they are superhuman baseline, each one of them, and that's just the PI 5 ghost. Getting up to the Teeks, which are telekinetic ghosts who can actually like lift things and have telekinesis, the ability to like squash people's brains or blow up machines and lift them into the air and things like that. I'm trying to like overdo the point here when I'm talking about why a ghost could kill a Space Marine. Like, why?
Yeah, Space Marines also aren't invincible. I mean, like I said, Tempestus Scions are known to take out Space Marines. Guardsmen can take out Space Marines. They're not invincible. It's just more often than not, a Space Marine is far superior. It's just if you catch them with their pants down type of a deal. Especially against psychic attacks, Space Marines don't have any defense against that. They have to bring a different unit that we'll talk about in order to have a chance against Psykers.
And would you like to talk about that unit and bring them in?
No, actually, I would go above I would go above Space Marines in A+, but not necessarily S tier, with the Vindicare Assassin. That's not...
Oh, wait, Vindicare is this guy, right?
Yep.
All right.
He can make a shot from the moon, case closed.
I've seen it happen.
Yeah. This is basically what you described, a ghost, just without psychic powers. They're trained in the Schola along with the Tempestus Scions, although they're put on a ship before they're taken to the Officio Assassinorum, where the assassins are trained, and they basically got to be the last one alive on the ship, killing off all the other aspirants, and then they're trained. So they're comparable in skill set that way, but like I said, they're not psychically enabled. They can definitely shoot and kill Space Marines, as well as just about anyone else in the verse. Their guns are extremely powerful, and they can load it up with what's called a shield breaker round, which, as the name would imply, is very good at penetrating armor. So much so it's pretty absurd. But the psychic potential just edges out of Vindicare, I say.
Yeah, that the ghosts wouldn't be what they are without their psychic powers, for sure, and that's why they are, recruited on that basis and trained. Like, they're the only ones in StarCraft who are trained since they're children to be soldiers and assassins. I don't know. It's hard to quantify, out of 10 fights, how often they would win. But we're just gonna
shoots first. Really.
Yeah, exactly. So we're just gonna kind of separate the tiers based on this person has this power which this other person can't really deal with.
I would put a Caladus Assassin, the female-looking one, below a Space Marine.
Ah.
I kind of forgot about them. They're really, true to their lore. They're really good at infiltration. They can take the disguise of just about anyone, and not just disguise themselves, but they morph their flesh into somebody using chemicals and stims, and they can stay like that for years. What makes them really good in terms of combat is not only their skills, but they're equipped with phase knives, which when we talk about Necrons way later, that's what they use. It completely ignores armor and is just able to pierce and slash and stab and kill. And one of them was able to kill a Primarch Conrad, though that was Conrad more or less saying, "Kill me, you won't."
Yeah, he gave into it.
Yeah, for lore reasons, I'm oversimplifying. But this assassin still had to get through all the Space Marines to get to Conrad. It's more named character-ish, but it is reflective of their overall training. They weren't the best Calladus assassin ever. They were just a Calladus assassin.
So maybe that would warrant possibly putting them just above Space Marines if they were able to single-handedly take a number of them out, and that's maybe above average.
I think I would agree for the same reason that that's why I'm putting the Ghost in S, is they could effectively kill them if they needed to.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't, for the sake of a squad of Space Marines could definitely take out a Calladus assassin.
Okay.
This Calladus assassin was very optimal conditions, was sneaking around, was using disguises. It wasn't fair one-on-one fights.
Got it.
Well, I mean, in a one-on-one, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
a one-on-one and squad fight, Calladus would lose, because a squad of assassins is just one assassin.
Yeah.
So.
it's hard to pit them against each other because they're supposed to be on the same team.
This one is going to be interesting. The Eversor Assassin, yep.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to put them above or below.
I'd be fine with either. I think this is a really interesting match.
Yeah, the Eversor Assassin is one that they essentially break their minds, driving them insane, or they're already insane. They pump them up full of drugs. They're elite trained as well, and then they're put in cryostasis, right? And then they're just dropped wherever you want someone to die. They can't distinguish between friend and foe, but they do have like a highly tactical mind. They're extremely intelligent, able to formulate plans and whatnot. So they do rip through squads of Space Marines, and even if a squad of Space Marines was able to take them down, their body explodes, releasing chemicals similar to a virus bomb, killing the Space Marines anyway. So wherever they go, someone's dying.
Yeah, I think the explosion thing kills the ghosts, like even if the ghost kills the assassin.
Yeah.
Depending on the range and, that good old adage, prep time, like I could see one or the other of them sort of just folding them. It just depends on, like, again, who shoots first. I'd say they're pretty relative.
Yeah. And, like, they have, like, special, like, needle guns and whatnot, but it doesn't matter what it does, because one shot would kill either side anyway.
Exactly.
I'm not really going to get into it.
Yeah. In this point, I would say, like, this is, and especially in these higher tiers, the scaling, depending on who's relative, does get a little more abstract, and these tiers will be more fun to compare for the named character list, I think.
Yeah.
But, yeah, in general, just your average ghost versus your average, Eversor. Yeah, it is going to be pretty, cut and dry, whoever gets the drop on the other, or whoever is, like, aware of the other beforehand.
I will bring in my next one, just to kind of put them in the tier above, the last assassin.
Yeah.
This is a definitive win, I would say, for the Calexus. So there's the Drukhari, which are the dark space elves, and all Drukhari, or all Eldar and Drukhari, are very intertwined with the warp. Their being is very with the warp. They call these Calexus assassins the most evil thing that the Imperium has at its disposal, because being around them without the Calexus even fighting has them like ripping their skin off, clawing out their eyes, screaming in agony, because they're what's called a pariah in the warp, which is like a blink, super blink. Super Saiyan blink. And they have some really interesting named characters when we eventually do the list. Like, there was one that was designed to kill the Emperor, and had a shot of doing so.
Wow. To go up against them, and to be honest, this is where my list definitely starts to get more wonky. These are the Shadowguard. So the resocialization process is a process that ghosts also are subjected to, where their memories are often rewritten and erased as frequently as every mission. Like, they won't even remember that they did it because their memories are then immediately erased, or circumstances that they remember about the mission are changed in their mind. This affects a ghost's psionic capability. They have neural inhibitors that limit how good of a psychic they can be. So everything that I said about the ghosts is true, but they're still limited by the Dominion, specifically so that they are not doing things like having nightmares that will kill people, which is something that happens if they don't have, like, the inhibitors. The Shadowguard are ghosts without those constraints. They're allowed to use the full breadth of their psionic capabilities. They are treated like human beings. They're not just weapons of the Dominion, and that's because they are actually Yemojin soldiers. So the Yemojins are a Terran faction who have everything the Dominion has, but, like, extraordinarily better. Their battle cruisers are better, their weapons are better, their ghosts are better. So the Shadowguard are like, when I looked into this, it was like the effectiveness of the pariah gene. It comes down to, and I'm just gonna make this case that like I'm not saying like I don't have a specific character that I would put in the scenario, but I'm just talking in general. If you take a blank and you have a psyker, if the psyker is like stronger than like the blank's, pariah or blank in this case, they can still use their powers and overpower the blank. By the same token, a blank that is a stronger blank than the psyker is overpowered by the blank. So the reason I'm putting the Shadowguard up here is specifically that token of being able to like use the full breadth of the psionic power. Shadowguards are able to do things like actually influence and control the minds of others around them without the use of specialized equipment that ghosts need to use. Like Nova, a named character, one of the craziest ghosts there is, still needs special equipment to be able to influence the minds of others. And that's like just to say like the effectiveness of those neural inhibitors and things like that. So I think there's a world in which a Shadowguard who's not inhibited could overpower the pariah of the Calexus, but I also see like that's I would say that's an exception to the rule in terms of ghosts and their abilities.
Yeah, the Calexus are just so anti-psyker that even psychic races can't stand to be around them. It's very hard to find psykers stronger than Calexus, I would say. Like, there was one being primed even to kill the Emperor, so they're as strong as blinks as they get. And what makes it even more so is they have a mask that enhances it. So without that mask, for sure. But with that mask, it's very hard to overpower them. And
yeah.
even with overpowering them, they still have resistance to psychic-based attacks.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, I was also gonna point that out, was to say that I'm gonna stick to the exception to the rule sort of theory here, because the Shadowguard being able to overpower the pariah gene, it's just to be able to fight.
Yeah.
And not. I did also in my research see that the people with the pariah gene are completely immune to direct psychic-based attacks and things like that. So they would then sort of fall into a more standard fight, which I think the Calexus probably still has a major advantage because the Shadowguard isn't able to take full use of their psychic abilities. I guess I'll throw in here, I'll also talk about I didn't get the image where I have his head. It's really sad. I don't want to have to remake the whole list. This is I'll edit him on screen. This is Gestalt. He is a named character. Why is he on this list? Well, they only ever made one Gestalt. This is technically Gestalt 0. So if you take a ghost and you genetically modify them with Protoss psionic powers, you get Gestalt. Zero's the only one to exist. He's on this list because they didn't actually do anything like one of a kind to make him. They just kind of never did it again. I'm not going to talk about like in terms of a fight if he'd be able to take on the Calexus Assassin. I just felt like it was worth mentioning on this list just because like the potential for others of him to exist is there. It just hasn't occurred.
Now that I'm kind of thinking about it, I think honestly I'd move Calexus up to SS, and then I'd just bring a librarian in to S+.
Sure.
I think I jumped up a little bit too much. S+ for librarian.
S+ librarian. Okay.
Yeah, like running back, I guess quickly. Space Marines that have psychic powers become librarians. Their strength varies wildly in the lore, creating like barriers to stop a virus bomb from exploding out, to dying to bolter fire. It's all over the place, honestly. They do have lightning and all these other feats, so I could see them taking on a ghost, but they would probably lose to the Shadowguard, just because they're not tippy top tier psykers. Some of them can be, but I would say your average one, not so much. They do also just have the training and equipment of Space Marines, So versus the Shadowguard, I would definitely say the Shadowguard have it better in terms of psychic powers versus a librarian. So, like a 4 out of 6 times a librarian, or 4 out of 10 times a librarian can take it.
And then after this, it's kind of gonna be up to you. And I'm gonna bring these 2 tiers up at the same time, actually, which I know is weird, but I'm gonna talk about them back to back. Because things get really wonky up here. So, Spectres... Yeah. Oh, what? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say S+, SS, and anything above it.
Yeah.
SSS. These are all... Like,
it's
really
a power
matters.
trip at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really matters who they're up against.
Exactly, yeah. This is named character tier. In terms of, like, who I think could actually fight and beat Calexus, it would be someone like Sarko. So Sarko is just representative of PI 10 ghosts. The problem is that every PI 10 ghost is a named character.
Yeah.
So I just have him here to represent them. Spectres, they're ghosts who they have the psionic interference with the psionic inhibitors undone. They have the same training as ghosts. They actually were created by the Dominion to be better ghosts, flat out, just they're statistically better. On a PI scale, if you take a ghost and you turn them into a Spectre, their PI will go up by at least 1. Sometimes, in the case of named characters, it's more, but take your average ghost, he becomes the average Spectre, his PI goes up by 1. So if you take where the most ghosts sit between a PI of 5 and 7, bumping that up to a 6 to 8 is a huge difference, especially when it comes to getting into that 8 tier, because now you're telekinetic and you're lifting things and blowing up brains. This wouldn't, of course, work against the Pariah, but I'm pointing out the level of difference of the psionic ability. I think that Spectres would be more than average capable to actually fight the Calexus. Whether or not they'd be able to win depends on what level PI that Spectre specifically is. That being said, again, this gets into speculative territory because we haven't seen it happen for some reason. If you took a PI 10 ghost and they became a Spectre, you'd probably be dealing with a Sarah Kerrigan level character, but we in StarCraft lore have not yet seen a PI 10 ghost actually use the Jorium and Terrazine that Spectres use to increase their psionic abilities and get that massive buff. We haven't seen that for a PI 10 character, so that's why they're sort of relative. Technically, Spectres are the highest limit of what a Terran should be capable of, but we've never seen that role actually fulfilled, so I can't put them up there. And that's sort of where the list sits. Sarko indicating PI 10, I think, would be SSS, but I don't know enough about the ones that are going to go up here. The PI 10 ghost could fit comfortably here or here.
I'll talk about the Grey Knights next. I could see them going top of S+ or SS tier. Each one of them could be equated to a librarian of a Space Marine chapter, but they are more designed to fight warp-based entities. They're not blinks, so they don't have that inherent advantage against other psykers.
Mm-hmm.
What they do have is just way better psychic powers. They also have the ability to teleport around, which makes them very unpredictable. You never know when one is coming, and it's always a surprise attack.
At the end of at the most modern version of StarCraft, ghosts now do have abilities or suits that allow them to teleport as well. I'd still leave this ranking system, I think, where it is, because Spectres would have that too. So,
yeah, Grey Knights also are super Space Marines. They're just better, faster, stronger. They're just baseline better. Their armor, though, is the same. They are just in ceramide armor. It's just unpainted, hence why they look gray and Grey Knights. They are enchanted with wards to add psychic protection, so they do have a level of that. Not as much as an Eversor would versus Spectres. I would say a Grey Knight one-on-one would lose against a Spectre, but a squad of Grey Knights, I feel could definitely edge out a win.
Especially since Grey Knights are not usually going to be singular,
Yeah.
whereas I feel like Spectres would be.
Yeah, exactly. Spectres would definitely be. Well, in lore, yes. Well, it's really weird. The Spectre and the Ghost's job is to be solo infiltrators, and they do this frequently. But anytime we're dealing with things like the actual Ghost books, so there's two books. There's Nova and there's Spectres. They actually have them working in teams and in groups. And at the start of this Ghost Academy series, they were like recruiting this new generation of ghosts who were going to be trained for the first time as squads. Unfortunately, Ghost Academy as a comic doesn't exist anymore. Anything I'd have to say beyond like, yeah, a group of Spectres being really strong because it's just a group of Spectres would be speculation on my part, so I can't really make a definitive argument in that case.
And then for SSS tier, good old Custodes. It'll be the last thing I talk about. I'm not talking about the other three.
Sure.
Um,
If we're putting this Custodes, we're going to book into like that. I'd put the PI 10 here.
So Custodians wear Auramite armor. I believe that's how it's called. It offers psychic resistance to nullification. So psykers aren't effective against Custodians at all. The effectiveness of their armor itself in terms of ballistic resistance is contentious at best. Whatever needs to go through their armor goes through their armor, is what I'll say. They're just the peak of what the Imperium has to offer that isn't a named character with books about them, even though each Custodian is technically a named character.
Yeah.
They're difficult to talk about in a broad sense, as aside from their equipment. They're excellent in melee and at ranged with their one weapon, the Guardian Spear. They're all handmade. They are genetically modified, but they're not, or they're genetically enhanced, but not modified. So they don't have extra like lungs that the Space Marines do, but their lungs work better than the Space Marines, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
They have a healing factor, but it's not like a Wolverine healing factor. There has been cases of Custodians getting like their brains blown out, like half of it, and still alive and fighting and conscious. I don't know. They're hard to talk about. They're very strong.
I'll bookend this by saying that I would say as we get this is like this S tier here is I'd say really the last definitive scaling that I can get into for Terrans. Like Spectres, really it's like, yeah, Shadow Guards are stronger than Spectres. That's what I know. Spectres are stronger than Shadow Guards, stronger than Ghosts. PI-10 stronger than Spectres. It's like it's hard to get into like the real specifics of it before we start to get into named characters. So these three tiers here, I'd say with the exception of the Custodes, which I think is like, well then like PI, yeah, no, it would have to, I'd have to get into PI-10. So yeah, these three tiers here, I'd say it's going to come down to the named character list. Yeah. But in general, I'm happy to say that the amount of research that I did in preparation for this video turned out that like StarCraft had a lot more fighting power here than I thought they did initially, but it's a definitive case for the Terrans that at the upper echelons here, especially approaching the Custodes and things like that, the Terrans fall off pretty steeply. There's like, I think, maybe 10 PI-10 characters in lore as far as we know. So they're so rare that it's like you could barely say like that at these levels the Terrans have a real fighting chance.
I would say B+ tier and below is the most interesting matchups.
Yeah, they're the closest for sure.
Mm-hmm.
StarCraft, if you want to put universe versus universe right now immediately, StarCraft just loses in scale.
Yeah, that was something.
If that's the answer that anyone's looking for, StarCraft loses in scale.
Absolutely. When we first sat down to record this video, this is actually the second time we decided to record. Before I did, I would say close to 3,000 pages of research for StarCraft. The number of human beings in the Imperium is, I believe it was like 14 quintillion, and the number of human beings, if you were to add the Terran Dominion plus the Emojins plus whatever the fuck exists, it wouldn't get near it. So there's no point in comparing like StarCraft to Warhammer unless you're talking about an even numbers fight, either 1 versus 1 or like a squad versus a squad. That being said, this is the final sort of version that this list is going to take until we talk about the next up is the Zerg versus the Tyranids, which I'm really excited about, and then we'll have the Protoss versus the Eldar and the Necrons.
I would say it's more of a three-way battle. Protoss versus Necrons versus Eldar.
that could be fun, yeah. And we also plan on doing the named character list probably after we finish those other 2 videos. That being said, thank you for watching. Hopefully this video was entertaining. Hopefully after my editing, it'll be more than just us 3 guys sitting here talking for 2 hours.